The video you're about to watch was recorded at our college coffee talk, done in a conversation about the sexual revolution and our identity in Christ and what's the truest thing about us. These are sensitive topics, and that was done in grace and humility in the room. And so if you have questions or if you're walking through these topics that are discussed, please email me at claytona@rushcreek.org, and our team would love to meet and chat with you. If you want to interact with us about this, we would love to hear feedback, and so please email us, and I hope you enjoy.
In her book published in 1970, Shulamith Firestone, which is a killer name, wrote this in her book, The Dialect of Sex, The Case for the Feminist Revolution. It's a great title, huh? She said this: and just as the end goal of the socialist revolution was not only the elimination of the economic class privilege, but the economic class distinction itself, so the end goal of the feminist revolution must be unlike that of the first feminist movement. Not just the elimination of male privilege, but the sex distinction itself. A genitalia difference between human beings would no longer culturally matter. A revision to an unobstructed pansexuality, Freud's polymorphous perversity, would probably supersede hetero, homo, or bisexuality. It's intense already. It was just starting off like that. The reproduction of species by one sex for the benefit of both would be replaced, at least the option of, artificial reproduction. Children would be born to both sexes equally or independently of either. However, one chooses to look at it, the dependence of a child on the mother and vice versa would give way to a greatly shortened dependence on a small group of others in general. And remaining inferiority to adults in physical strength would be compensated for culturally. The division of labor would be ended by the elimination of labor altogether through cybernetics. The tyranny of the biological family would finally be broken. See, this sounds like something that might come from a sci-fi novel. Cybernetics doing the work first, we already see that, the elimination of family and gender, because this implication from this is already happening in our Equality Act that's being talked about in Congress right now. This act denies there's a biological reality that there are two sexes, male and female. It's an attempt to erase the biological dimorphism of human beings, to say that there is no longer gender or sex. It wants to establish equality, but in doing so, it eradicates the notion that's been throughout history of biological sex. But how did we get here? We got here because we know that sex is identity today. It's seen in our Twitter bios, our Instagrams, our pronouns are front and center. Sex is also about politics. Every political decision is talking about how will this affect us. And sex is culturally prevalent. Listen to music, TV shows, everything that we watch and listen to is shaping us, and sex is front and center. Gallup indicates that over the past 8 years, Americans identifying as the LGBTQ has increased by 60%, jumping from 3.5% to 5.6%. In 2001, or 12, the LGBTQ identification among baby boomers was 2.7. Today, among Gen Z, it is 15.9% of individuals say they are part of the LGBT community. So tonight, as we talk about the sexual revolution and how to love the LGBT community, this is not, we have to clarify some definitions that we're going to use tonight. Because the left and the right are making this a war for your life. The left is saying your sex is all about your identity. It's who you are. It's the most essence. It's your essence. So let's clarify some definitions for us. Sex is defined historically as a biological maleness or femaleness, that we are sexually dimorphic beings. So there's two ways there's only one way we can reproduce, by male and female. That's how we are. Now, there are a small population of what's called an intersex, which are not both and, they're both and, but they usually identify as either male or female. They have both genitalia, and this makes up about 0.22 to 1.7% of the population experience intersex, and these are people that we care about. So sex, we're sexually dimorphic, male, female, to reproduce. Now, gender is a term that's more often used and sometimes substituted for the word sex. There's gender role, which are ways males and females are expected to act in culture. These are all based on stereotypes. In 1918, in Ladies' Home Journal, I did not read this, but in Ladies' Home Journal, pink, being a more decided and stronger color, is more suitable for the boy, while blue, which is more delicate and dainty, is prettier for the girl. But what happens today when you go to a gender reveal party or you walk into a baby's room? Most often, boys' rooms are going to be blue, and the ladies will be pink. Yet just in 1918, the gender role, the stereotype, was that boys would wear pink. Stereotypes changed based on the culture and the time. So how about gender identity? This is where we're really at tonight. Is one's self-perception of sex divorced from your genetic reality? I identify as blank. Now, 80% of people who experience gender dysphoria, which is a biological dissonance in your body that you think that you're born into the wrong body, 80% who experience this will return back without any treatment to their biological sex. Yet culturally, we do not push that forward. We operate out of the other narrative, that you must be true to the self that you identify as. So tonight, one of the main things we're going to be talking about is identity. How we've gotten here, because we love music, and as a former youth pastor, I would always hear, I just love the music because of the beat, the music, the instruments that are playing on. But if we're honest, we don't listen to music that celebrates celibacy or chastity. We love the music that is all about promiscuity, sex, sleeping around. That is what sells. TV shows, it's a part of everyday life now. So we find this because we look inside to find ourselves, to find our truth. And when somebody is against our truth, we feel they're being oppressive and they're trying to shackle us. And you're like, no, that's not that bad. We want to find our truth so bad. If somebody's truth goes against your idea of truth, because ethics is all about our feelings now, what we identify with. If it's based off feelings, my authentic self will contradict how you see your authentic self at times. And when you contradict me, you are out to get me. You are not for me. So we celebrate stories in our culture of people understanding and coming to fruition of their authentic self, like Caitlyn Jenner in 2015. When she came to her authentic self, we celebrated that. People did. Yet there's just as much stories of people, deconversion stories, of people walking away from the LGBT community that are silenced. Schools even call CPA on families whose child themselves have decided not to transition fully into the opposite sex and reverted back to their biological sex. See, I'm saying sex a lot tonight because it's what's forming us the most in our culture. The ultimate good for us is what we get out of it sexually in our mind. Little Nas, I really don't know much about him, but he said this quote recently, just a couple weeks ago. I feel like weddings are dope, but not marriage. It's time we normalize weddings without the bondage of being with someone for the rest of our life. The dude just wants to have fun. He just wants to party. See, 80% of Americans agree that the individual you should arrive at the truth of your own beliefs independent of anybody else. And you might agree with that statement. And when we do, we come out to something like Little Nas, which is not his own belief at all. We're going to do a little history lesson to see how we got here. Jean Rousseau in the 1700s blamed society for his sin as a perverting force in his life. For Rousseau, the individual is at his best when he's most truly himself as he should be, and when he acts in accordance with his nature, his sexual desire. Poets and artists like Percy Shelley and William Blake put an emphasis on sex as the central element of individual authenticity in the 1700s and early 1800s. Little Nas, wanting just to have fun at weddings but not be tied down to his life, comes from William Goodwin in 1700s, who dismisses marriage and said it dooms people to a lifetime of unnecessary misery and is oppression to all involved. He was married twice. In Goodwin's proposed utopia, no man would be joined exclusively to one woman, but would share in each other in a sexual community, raising children not knowing who the real parents are. In the early 1800s, Thomas Quincy emphasized that a moral sense is ultimately an aesthetic sense. What it means is what feels good, what looks good for me has to be true. And that's an ever-changing target. In the late 1800s, early 1900s, Sigmund Freud, who has more influence on us than possibly any of these, pulled from this line of thinking that the real key to human existence, your existence, is to have yourself sexually fulfilled and your desires sexually fulfilled. That's what it means to be human, nothing else. So now we categorize ourselves by our pronouns or this gender that we are, the sex that we are attracted to. See, we've detached our body from our soul, and we're no longer connected because we say biological sex is different, gender is different. Our sexual acts are now null and void. Some would even say the only reason people now engage in sexual activities is not because of a connection or a relationship, but so that as an individual, I can derive some pleasure from it. So now partners are just a tool for me to get some type of pleasure. See, this is a new type of from an ancient philosophy of a Gnostic thinking that I have attained some truth beyond somebody else, and you are not as wise as me because you have not attained this. So how did these men shape us to see the culture where we can say, find your own truth, be true to you today? It's through music. It's through what you watch. It's through who you follow and what you listen to. All of this is shaping our identity in what we believe about the world. And all of it is saying, live for the here and now, and nothing else matters. Yet this is a hard target. Carl Trueman says society is constantly changing its mind about what is and is not fashionable, what is and is not cool, and what is and is not acceptable. See, when I was growing up in middle school, I wore super baggy jeans called Jinko jeans, and I had a side part with a large shirt on. I learned to grow up, as Paul said, I matured and grew up in the Lord, and I no longer wear that stuff. But that was fashionable, and now it's coming back. Why? Because society is changing its mind constantly. Just like in 1918, blue was for women, pink was for men. Yet we might think we have power to create ourselves and our own identities. But we are typically subject to the range of options and the value schemas that society itself sets over, in which most individuals, considered as individuals, have very limited power to change. Consumerism makes us believe we can be whoever we want to be, but the market always places limits on that in reality. We want you to be true to you, be your authentic self, but you have to be it in this way. We see it all the time. It comes straight from Friedrich Nietzsche himself. Be whoever you want to be and do whatever works for you. Yet it causes a dissonance in us, because it makes us the God and the sovereign of our own lives. And when you're the God and sovereign of your own life, that's an exhausting task. And so because we're social creatures, we move to environments that will strengthen and accept our beliefs that we have formed about ourselves. Many of you and maybe your friends might have gone to YouTube or Instagram or a blog, and you wrestle with these questions. Did God make me this way? Did God make me gay? You don't find your answers in the church, so you turn outside, and then it's led to resentment and frustration. Will God accept me if I choose this identity for myself? See, God is a generous God. He will give you what you're looking for, even though if it's not Him. because it will lead you down a path that will see that He is the only one that will fully satisfy you. So you or your friends might be deconstructing your view of what it means to be a human, what sexuality means, and what relationships mean. Do not do this in an echo chamber on social media or on the internet, but find people who love you for who you are and not as a statistic that they can use to politicize their certain ideas about themselves. I think the reason that we're here tonight and the reason that we walk down this path is because people are looking for dignity and worth, to be loved and to be accepted. And culture tells us that we're loved and accepted, we have dignity when we find it in our sexual desires. And it's not our job up here tonight to tell the world how to live, but as a follower of Jesus, we're called to, as the church, called to walk out being the church as we're formed into the image of Christ. And we believe that sex is displaying the goodness and the glory of God and how He designed it to be. Mark Outhouse ends with this: to be human is to experience a longing for completion. Did God create us with a longing for completion that forces us to look outside of ourselves so that that longing itself would be illustrative? It may be that the longing for the other that is related to our biological sex and gender selves, because it is meant to represent a longing for God. The creation of two sexes provides in a living illustration of a point intended to direct us to a Creator. See, God's design for sexuality is meant to display His goodness in Him as Creator. So how is that lived out? How do we find out what's the truest thing about us if it's not our sexuality?